pack of cigarettes, right? I think you have to be a sophisticated trader, like extremely knowledgeable about the VIX futures curve and contango backwardation, gamma moves. So I kind of would say it's not for the average person to use it, and then you really have to kind of time it because the volatility is massive.
I mean, the thing is, you've been advising mostly institutions, right, for a couple of decades on portfolio construction. So these are people who know how to use these kind of tools. Nonetheless, Gary Gensler may be worried about people buying them that don't.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say institutional investors largely know how to trade VIX, right? I mean, trading volatility is just this very extreme, difficult asset class. You've really got to time it. And I doubt the average ETF retail user is going to be able to actually time it. So I kind of would stay, your traffic light system, I would put, triple red.
We were going to make a skull and crossbones label just for the TVIX, but we just went with red light. Yeah, it's got like 7 different things that it scored negatively on, or just warning labels. Yeah. But I agree. I think a movie rating system is needed to protect the innocent.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit again, because I do want to talk about your fund in particular. I'm talking about the Access Astoria Inflation Sensitive ETF. Aptly, the ticker is PPI. And obviously, anything with the word inflation in the name has gotten a ton of inflows, a ton of interest over the past year. But I'm curious how you pitch this against something simple like TIPS, which are much more well-known as an inflation hedge.
So TIPS, I would say if you're just managing a portfolio of bonds, like maybe that's okay because, TIPS, they'll give you some protection if inflation rises and, the Lehman aggregate bond index is down 6%. TIPS are maybe down 1%, maybe up 1% depending on maturity, of that TIP ETF. But at the end of the day, they're still underperforming the rate of inflation. So CPI is, 7-8%. So you really need to own, from my vantage point, things like commodity equities, or cyclicals, which will actually keep up with the rate of inflation. So that's what we try and do. PPI has about 80-85% cyclical stocks, 10-15% commodities. We do have TIPS in there. It's more for a portfolio dampener. But I think for the last 10-20 years, again, you haven't had inflation. Rates have been going down. So I just think to have a little bit, like 3 to 5% of your portfolio and something that protects you against higher inflation, will bode well. We're off to a good start year to date in terms of performance flows. So.
Yeah, you're up 14-15%. There are other inflation ETFs, but this, is it more of a hedge against inflation or a bet on a big inflation?
So I would say, it's gonna, we want to embrace inflation, and we want we know inflation's rampant, so we're picking stocks and sectors that have historically done well when inflation rises. So it's based on empirical evidence, so things like energy, oil and gas exploration, steel stocks. So we want you to we think that this can, do well as inflation rises. So not necessarily protect it, but embrace it and go up when inflation goes up.
All right, very interesting stuff. Thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate you dropping by the studios. John Davies there of Astoria Advisors. Coming up, Morgan Stanley jumping on the ETF bandwagon. Will it look to fellow Wall Street bank JP Morgan on how to succeed? That's next. This is ETF IQ on Bloomberg.